Welcome to Technado with Don Pizzette, featuring sysadmin expert Don Pizzette, security specialist Daniel Lowry, and Peter.
Hello and welcome to Technado with Don Pizzette. I'm your host, Peter Van Rysdam, joined as always by Don Pizzette. Don, how's it going?
It is going great. You know, we got an exciting guest lined up. I won't let the cat out of the bag yet, so I'm excited about that. And we've got our first real day of winter in Florida, so things are really shaping up for a good day.
And we also have a second pseudo guest because we've got filling in for Daniel, who's probably at home playing with his new Flowbee. We have Wes Bryan. Wes, how's it going?
Hey, it's going great. Thanks for having me here, guys. Looking forward to today's podcast.
And you're growing out the hair in the back there, too. You could use the Flowbee again.
I've got my not going to the hair.
And you know, if you listen to the podcast last week, we mentioned the Flowbee completely out of the blue. Obviously, George Clooney is a listener because he posted this week that he cuts his hair with a Flowbee.
Okay.
And has, like, his whole... Like
he says for a long time, yeah.
That's crazy.
So thanks, George, for listening. We appreciate you being one of our viewers.
Good to see you. Tell Brad I said hi. And we are also joined by Jeff Mitchell, who is a cloud solutions architect at Microsoft. Jeff, how's it going?
It's going well. How are you guys?
Doing good.
You're good? You good? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak
we
for all of us.
just established
but,
that, Jeff, in the beginning of the show.
I should have checked them first. But yeah, we're good apparently. So thank you so much for joining us. And and you actually found out about us from Christian Brinkhoff, who we've had on before. Are you guys on the same team or in kind of the same area?
Yeah, so I used to work as in the one commercial partner space in the U.S., and I worked on Windows Virtual Desktop, Azure VMware Solutions, and server migration or data center transformation. And so we worked a lot with Windows Virtual Desktop in the same area.
All right, cool. Well, let's get to know a little bit more about you in our first segment, Rapid Fire Questions.
Who do you work for?
What's new?
Who are you?
What's happening?
What's wrong with you?
All right, Jeff, in this segment, we've got 5 questions canned, or 4 and some, we'll see, that we're going to throw at you. And basically, you'll have 1 minute to answer each one. If you go too long, you will get buzzed by Peter.
Oh, shoot, every week. I should write that down.
Yeah.
There it is.
There we go. I need to just adjust my little speech.
No, yeah, it's me.
If you go on for 1 minute and 7 seconds, then you will get buzzed by Peter, and we'll move on to the next question.
I did it that time.
Nice. So that's the plan, and we'll rotate through each of us, and I think Peter has our first question.
Yeah, normally the first question is, so what does your company do? But you're Microsoft, so we're not going to do that one. But I do want to ask kind of about your
I need more than a minute.
Yeah, it's Xbox mostly. So you went from a partner cloud solution architect to a cloud solution architect. So I'm curious what the difference is there. What that transition means for you. Was one like a contract position, or now are you officially part of Microsoft, or how does that work, and what's your role now?
Yeah, great question. So when I made my transition earlier in the year, there were some requirements for role moves. And so I started off as a partner cloud solution architect, working with partners and with our field, with customers. And then when I was making a transition, a role change because of COVID-19, there was some lock-in on the types of titles that can be transitioned. So my actual description of what I do is more of a program manager, is more of a solution strategist. So think about the area of enabling enabling our team on Azure worldwide, right? So it's a CSA role right now. That was something that kind of got in there. But what I like to tell people, right, is you take a job for 2 reasons: the type of work and the manager that you're going to be working for. And so really fantastic team that I'm working with right now. And the work that we're doing right now, Global Impact, has been fantastic for myself to get that experience. And coming from a partner place, I was able to contribute to the team that I'm currently working on with one worldwide commercial business, with helping us with how we align with partners, how we engage with partners, because I was very intimate with that space previously.
Jeff, now you were previously an MVP. What made you, come on over to the dark side or join the mothership, to say, so to speak?
That's funny. Well, I think, I had previously worked at a gold managed partner, and in that role, my job was to wear many hats. The job was to sell to customers. It was to engage our delivery team and support them, and many times sit next to them and do the work with them. And then on top of that, there was just this engagement and community and growth, right? And in the Northwest Florida area where I'm from, there's, we range from Tampa all the way up to Atlanta over into Dallas and Houston, and the market of opportunity that we connect with. So I got a lot of experience with in the MVP community, speaking at different sessions where I would get invited from customers that we were working with, or get invited from others who were in the team. And so the MVP program was a staple for myself. I kind of think of it as like a way to challenge myself with public speaking, and from a perspective of Toastmasters, is like getting up and talking about the technology and getting in front of people. We really have to understand it. You really have to understand the industry. And so the MVP really prepared me for the aspect of not just being really technical proficient, but also being able to communicate with people, those core messages and strategies for technology. And then, when the opportunity rose with Microsoft, they were looking for, in their team, they were looking for someone who could build practices. And that was something that I've done. Many partners that I worked for previously, starting with managed service practice, Office 365 practice, Azure practice. So it was a very natural transition to say, now that I've learned how to start these different practices in managing and technology, how do I then help take that whole package and help partners to then build their own practices, right? So I'd like to say it's an amalgam of my career. It built me up for the opportunity to be able to jump in from that MVP and start teaching people what I had learned my whole life, professional life, with building managed service practices and cloud-based practices.
All right, now I'm going to ask a big question, and so I got to remind you to try and hold this one to a minute because it could get big. You mentioned helping people and building practices and helping people get into Azure, worldwide. One of the ways that you're doing that, I know, is that you champion the cloud adoption framework inside of Microsoft and a lot of the enterprise landing zones that we're going to talk about a bit more later. So what does that cloud adoption framework look like for a customer?
So cloud adoption framework is everything that a customer would need to adopt Azure and organize their business from the top down. So I think of that as starting from a CIO, a chief level operations officer. When you need to establish a cloud center of excellence, you need to make a plan for cloud adoption. You need to make sure that you include a strategy for how you're going to train your people and adopt certain tools. And then you actually have to get to the practice of building in the cloud in what is the ready phase of the cloud adoption framework, which is where enterprise scale landing zone is. And then you build that muscle of managing it and operating it in an ongoing fashion. So those 5 phases that I just went through are the cloud adoption framework, and that's the target for the guide for a customer who is coming to Azure. We also have well-architected framework, which is more of a workload specific for what I would think of decentralized IT operations.
And real quick, when you say this is the framework for people coming to Azure, are we talking about anyone, or is this more geared towards small businesses that maybe don't have a big staff internally, or is this Fortune 500 companies using these tools as well?
Right. So like when I talked about WAF, I mentioned decentralized IT. There are customers who are using WAF with centralized IT. WAF is the well-architected approach to a workload that's coming to the cloud. Cloud adoption framework is where you need to not only think about the specific workload that you're migrating in Azure, but you also need to think about the overall business processes, the portfolio of technology that you have, and then how you would enable your company to adopt Azure. And so certainly that is a broad spectrum of customers, and the cloud adoption framework is very broad to help customers meet them where they are, whether small, medium, or large, and then help them with design that journey for bringing their business and operating on Azure.
We did it. That was perfect timing. Perfect timing.
Just under the wire.
Yeah, the clock ran a long time ago, but I just feel bad. I feel bad pressing that button. Yeah. So, all right. Well, as Don mentioned, we want to talk a little bit more about what those landing zone and migrations and things look like. So let's get into our next segment, which is Science and Tech News.
Stay tuned for Science and Technology. And now, back to the anchor desk.
Thank you. So the article we're looking at today is from azure.microsoft.com. It's preparing for what's next, building landing zones for successful cloud migrations. And so Don was kind of giving me a little bit of an overview before you came on. Jeff, we were talking about, because I was asking, what exactly are landing zones? How does that work? So can you kind of give us a little bit of background first, and then we can kind of get into the best way for people to use these tools?
Yeah, so the story here, the analogy is to a landing zone for um, a plane that is coming in to land or a helicopter that's coming in to land, right? So the landing zone idea or concept is that you would have a place to land something, right? And so in technology, we use the landing zone terminology to mean when you are preparing an environment to receive an application or a workload, right? So landing zones are it can be a platform landing zone, meaning that it's like across Azure. It could be a landing zone that is specific to a workload like Windows Virtual Desktop. We talked about Christian earlier, where we're developing a landing zone for that. And so this is kind of a deep-rooted history using this language with technology on the landing zone. Landing zone constructs within technology typically rely around making sure your requirements for identity, requirements for networking, requirements for storage are all met, so that when you start your adoption process of moving those key workloads into Azure, you can accelerate that process as well as meet all of the functional requirements that you have. And so for the enterprise scale landing zone, the goal for us is to solve three customer challenges. The first one is to eliminate the architectural complexity and provide clear decisions that you need to make along the way of your cloud adoption. The second is to give security the control that they require, so that in the front of your adoption process, you have auditing and you have your security configurations in place, so we can meet the security, the InfoSec IT team with their requirements and give them a pull system that which they can quickly deploy. And the third customer challenge is around a cloud operating model. So architecture itself is very great because it tells you how to set up and configure things within the cloud. What's more important is how your actual business process of deploying and managing within the cloud, what your tactic or structure or style is going to be there. So providing a cloud operating model, reducing architectural complexity, and providing the security that a customer would need in the start. Those are the three objectives of the enterprise scale landing zone, and how we view landing zones as a whole.
And I definitely think you're saying all the right things there, because I know for a developer, somebody who's doing DevOps, a company even, if they're moving into the cloud the first time, there's a lot of moving pieces. That if I'm deploying a web application, I likely have a web server running as an Azure VM. I have an Azure database, a SQL server on Azure, Azure AD for authentication and identity management. All these different pieces, the storage objects, the security configuration. You can't just say, I'm going to learn this one piece and start there. I'm just going to learn Azure VMs and that's it, and then I'll expand out later on. It doesn't really work that way. You have to learn all the pieces at once. So with the enterprise landing zones, you guys are kind of taking care of that, right? You're deploying all those different pieces at once so somebody can get started really quick. One thing I'm curious about, though, is the cloud, just by its nature, is very flexible, and every customer has different needs, different design requirements. So how do you guys come up with these landing zones that meet the greatest need of customers? How do you know what people are going to expect to use?
I think the way that we start with scoping is to say, how can we take a modular approach that when you make a decision, you don't have to go back and refactor. And that's a very hard, it's a very hard engineering problem to solve. One of the things that you mentioned, which you talked about archetype neutral, right? Is that I'm not just focusing on VMs, but I'm looking at applications and data and security configurations as well. What you hit on there with archetype neutral is exactly how we approached the process of building out the enterprise scale architecture and reference implementation, which is to concrete ourselves within 5 principles. And one of those principles is to be archetype neutral, right? Is that we don't focus on IaaS or SaaS or PaaS, because Azure's the platform. We focus on the application, and the application could be a series of servers, a series of web apps, a series of app services, functions, data warehouses, etc. It's normally going to be an amalgam of those things, right? And so we took the decision to make the imperative to create design guidelines. The first one is subscription democratization, right? And in this guideline, we say a customer who's creating subscriptions within Azure should use subscriptions and democratize them for workloads and shared services. So it's not a single subscription model. The second thing we do is we talk about Azure policy, and we say Azure policy should be used as governance for guardrails so that your security configurations for things like having your Azure all of your Azure activity logs to go directly into log analytics just happens when a subscription is deployed. So you're not thinking about configuration post subscription creation. You're thinking about the configuration in the start of the platform. And as subscriptions are pulled by new workloads or by new subsidiaries or whatever that scenario may be, that subscription once generated then receives the configuration for log analytics, security, connectivity, identity, and then is ready to be up and running and run a production workload. So really a no-cliff design and requires you to have principles. And so we've got subscription democratization, we've got policy-driven governance, we've got the archetype neutral, right? We have this concept around making sure that we don't have any gotchas in that operational model that I talked about, that cloud operation model. So if a customer is making changes in the portal, they can go in and grab that in their code base. If a customer makes changes in the code base, they can go and grab that in their portal. So it's maintaining this no cliff approach and really aligning ourselves to our design principles that helped us to be successful here. And you got to draw some hard lines in the sand when you do that. So it's a lot of great people and great minds in making that happen.
Now, you mentioned production workload, right? So this is not like what I was saying, just getting started. You're not just dabbing your toe in. You're saying, I'm ready to move production workload in there. So do these landing zones, do they take into account more complex architectures like multi-region or multi-availability zone, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so the enterprise scale landing zone is a platform landing zone that receives the workload specific the specific application, right? So, and I say workload, I'm talking about an application. So if you think about it, things like SAP, they don't just have a front end, they have a back end, they have a middle tier, they may have some ancillary servers that have special plugins or integration. When you think about AKS, many times AKS is talking to different services, right? And so the landing zone, the enterprise scale landing zone sets up the model that you would need to manage the platform. So you have a platform management group in Azure that has subscriptions underneath of it. And those subscriptions that reside underneath that management group get the configuration for things like when we talk about management, I talked about log analytics, but let's take another example, like with connectivity. With connectivity, we can actually, as a customer deploys a subscription under a specific management group in Azure, we can have that automatically connect to a shared network environment, a VNet, and the application owner, or what we call the app ops team, would be able to create new subnets for their application, but not necessarily VNets. That's a centralized IT function, a platform ops team. So we've got the platform ops and the app ops team, and they work in conjunction to fulfill the business needs. And as you move from centralized IT to decentralized IT, you start seeing those boundaries between platform ops and app ops start to mingle. And remember, my app ops is also my VM managers, right? So it's not, we're not sticking to a specific archetype that's infrastructure as service or platform as service or SaaS as service. We're bridging all of those together for whatever the customer's requirement is for the application.
Jeff, I don't know if I trust any of this because I just noticed you're wearing an Apple Watch, and I feel like if you were a real Microsoft person, there would be a Zune tied to your arm. Oh, is there a Zune? What is that? That's the Surface Duo?
Yeah.
Wait, is that not out yet?
Now you're like, whoa, cred through the roof.
How'd this guy get that?
Yeah.
It is out, right?
It is out
It's just
publicly?
incredibly
It is
expensive.
out.
Oh, it's
Yep.
expensive. That's
Yes.
what it is. It's cost prohibitive. Yeah, it's not out for me.
Here's the thing I'll say about the Duo. So my mom recently had a heart surgery, and there were some meetings I absolutely had to be in. And I use this with Teams. There's a little camera right here, loads Teams in 2 modes,
Wow.
chat on the bottom, video on the top. And I used it like heck during that time with these Surface earbuds.
I thought you were going to, nice. I thought you were going to say you could control a pacemaker with that, which would be really cool too.
No, those are locked down by government. You're not supposed to mess
What?
with those.
Yeah, I don't know.
I did ask a lot of questions when we got to that part, and that's exactly kind of what we went through. So that's amazing.
Yeah. Like that thing doesn't have Bluetooth, right? Okay.
Yeah. I asked a lot of questions.
Yeah. Well,
Is there
so
an app for that? No, there's not an app for this.
yeah, thank God. Yeah. So I know normally, Microsoft has a lot of events and stuff going on. I think you guys are all virtual through 2021, but you guys are kind of done for the season right now, right? You don't have anything until like spring next year?
Yeah, we have webinars coming out. We have a whole series of events. Something that was just launched on Channel 9 is the Enablement Show. So you can go to Microsoft Channel 9. We launched a series on well-architected framework, as well as launched a series on Azure governance, and the landing zone portions are included in there. So that actually just launched last week or the week before. There we have more that's going to be coming out as we get closer to the end of this year. But yeah, that's our main, everything we're doing now is virtual. Everything that we're executing for our customers and help their businesses, WVD is a core component of that. So yeah, that's kind of the most top of mind when it comes to kind of what's coming down the pipe with trainings, et cetera, and public events.
And you shared some documentation with me as well from Microsoft Docs, the Start with Cloud Adoption Framework Enterprise Scale Landing Zones. Is that, we'll put that in the description on YouTube here as well, but is that kind of a great place for people to start to, kind of understand this if they're not familiar with it too much?
Right. So the enterprise scale landing zone is a core component of the cloud adoption framework. We're in the ready section of the cloud adoption framework under Azure landing zones. There's also a start small and expand. So, we were speaking a little bit earlier about customers' needs and being able to meet a customer where they are, whether they're a small business or a large business, or maybe they just have a different cloud adoption approach. And so that's one place I could call out specifically within the ready section of the cloud adoption framework. In our Azure landing zones, we have a start small and expand, and we have enterprise scale landing zone, and two different approaches for a customer who has different requirements.
Perfect. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to educate us on landing zones and all that great stuff.
Yeah, it's great, guys. Good to be here.
All right, everybody stay tuned. We're going to take a quick break, come back with more Technado with Don Pizzette right after this break.
This is Josh. Josh spent $2,500 on a week of classroom training for CompTIA A+ and got certified. Josh got a good job that pays $40,000 per year. This is Jeremy. Jeremy only spent $299 on a full year of training from IT Pro TV, including A+ and 300 other courses. Jeremy also got a great job that pays $40,000 per year. Jeremy used the more than $2,200 he saved in IT training for a fabulous tropical vacation. Now, Jeremy is still using his IT Pro TV membership to study for Network Plus and Security Plus to advance his career, but not spending any more money, since all three are included in his IT Pro TV membership, plus 300 more courses. Don't be like Josh. Choose IT Pro TV for your IT training.
All right, welcome back to Technado with Don Pizzette, and I keep getting confused thinking I'm looking at Clark Kent over here, not Don Pizzette, because you got the glasses on, but you still have your powers?
No, I've learned that if you wear glasses, people just assume you're smart. You don't have to study anymore.
Been working for me for years.
Yeah.
That's why I got LASIK. People were getting so confused thinking that I was smart. I'm like, no. It's just the glasses. Well, thank you so much to Jeff Mitchell for joining us and teaching us all about landing zones and that great stuff with Azure. Definitely very cool, and we'll have him back on when we have some more announcements in the spring for sure. But first, let's go ahead and get into our news articles. We've got our first one from TheVerge.com. Prolonged AWS outage takes down a big chunk of the internet. AWS has been experiencing an outage for hours, and this was back on November 25th, kind of when this was happening. But this is just a whole commercial for Azure today, isn't it?
Sort of. So this is a big deal, right? For a few different reasons. But anytime AWS has an outage is a big deal, right? But when it has an outage right before Black Friday, the biggest sales day of the year, leading into Cyber Monday, like that's a huge, huge thing. And so when they went down, they were down for like a solid 2 hours having big problems, and then like little problems carried on for a few more hours before it was all cleaned up after about 4 hours total. So it's a big deal. And the lesson that we get out of this is actually kind of an important one. So that's why I wanted to talk about it today. Is they've had time now to analyze what happened, and the problem they had was with the AWS Kinesis service. Kinesis is basically like a giant fire hose of data. You can dump tons of data in there and it handles it. And they use it for a number of different things. And they use it themselves. So Amazon uses AWS Kinesis for a lot of their stuff. And they were trying to get ready for Black Friday, and they were wanting to scale their systems out to add more muscle behind the technology to make sure it could withstand the load they were about to hit. Well, as they started scaling out, things went crazy. And Kinesis basically stopped working. Or at least in the US East 1 region. So there's one particular data center, but that is the biggest of the data centers, the default that everybody uses. And when that went down, it was almost a comedy of errors after that, because Amazon's service status page depends on Kinesis for updates. And so they couldn't update their service status page to let people know that Kinesis was broken. And this isn't the first time that's happened. Amazon has just insisted on maintaining their own service status page on their own hardware, which is not something other companies do.
Yeah, that's kind of ironic. You can't say, that your site's down if your site's down.
Yeah, it's a bit of a marketing issue where on one hand, you want to be able to tell your customers the service is down, but on the other hand, you don't want to use a competitor's product to host the service. So, they say, by using our own hardware, we're testifying that it's great, that it's not going to go down, that we'll always be able to update it. And they did have a manual process, but it turns out nobody was really trained in the manual process for updating it. So it took them hours just to admit that they had an outage, which was a big problem.
So you mentioned the East Coast zone, and so that's what I was curious about, because, to me, what I understand about the benefit of being in the cloud is, well, if this zone goes down, the next one picks it back up, and obviously things might be slower because I'm getting my data from further and more people are accessing different zones. But were things technically down across the board?
So in AWS, and this goes for Azure as well, you have availability zones and you have regions, and those are different things. So a region is usually like a geographic region.
It's like Europe or...
Well, it's a little more specific. So like there's US East, which is a location in North Virginia. Or Northern Virginia. We don't actually have a North Virginia state. So
get one.
In Northern Virginia, near Washington, D.C., basically, there is the U.S. East region. And in the U.S. East region, you have multiple availability zones. I think there's 5, maybe 6 altogether now, availability zones. Now, if one AZ goes down, the others stay up. But services like Kinesis spread across availability zones, and so they went down for that whole region. If you had resources in U.S. West or U.S. East 2, you were fine. But if you're in US East 1, you had an outage. And US East 1 is the default. So if you don't specify a region, that's the one you end up in. And so it's heavily used by a lot of people. And so, it turns out one way to dodge the bullet on this one is if you just chosen a different alternative.
That was one of the things I was wondering. You kind of answered it, Don, is how a single region like that would affect so many, such a large portion of the internet. I mean, these are big companies. Roku is out. Who else? I mean, you think Tampa Bay Times is another one that's out there. I mean, these are big companies, and for a single zone to fail like this, and it affect everybody.
Adobe iRobot, people's Roombas stopped phoning home. They couldn't control their Roomba. What? Yeah, madness. Yeah. The interesting thing is, with Amazon, one of the things they always tell you is that you should scale out, not up, right? If I have a server that's getting under load, I could add more CPUs to it or add more RAM, but there's a limit that you hit. But if you scale out, you can add as many instances as you want and increase your muscle. Well, what happened here is a classic DevOps scenario where you have developers who understand their software, they understand their technology, but they don't understand the underlying operating system. And so with Kinesis uses thousands of servers, but all of the servers need to know about each other. So they have these threads that are open that connect each one to each other. Well, every server you add adds another thread. And this runs on top of Linux, and they had a maximum thread count set. And when they hit that maximum thread count, it went to hell. Like the whole system went crazy. And the solution was to go in and reboot. But their automation tools are wrapped up in Kinesis too, and they couldn't use those. They had to do manual reboots of thousands of servers. And their solution in the end was to scale up instead of scaling out. So it's kind of ironic. It's going against this advice they've given everybody for a long time. But they are scaling up now to be able to handle more threads that way. You just require less threads because their servers are able to do more work. So it's a bit of a lesson for a lot of people to learn is DevOps is dangerous in some scenarios if you don't understand the limitations of the operating system running underneath your software.
I wonder in the future if we'll see a change on what that default is, being default east like that, if we'll see that spread out a little bit more.
Yeah, there's not really a whole lot of reasons why you couldn't do that. It used to be that some services were only available in certain regions, but Amazon's done a good job of leveling the playing field across it. So unless you're deploying somewhere weird, like in Southeast Asia, or in Brazil, now you've got some limited features. But if you're deploying in the U.S. or Europe, it's pretty much feature parity.
Brazil is weird. You heard it here first. I'm so glad that you mentioned Roomba, though, because I realized now, and I just checked the date to be sure. On Wednesday, I was like driving somewhere, and I said, I should set the Roomba so I can, it'll be clean when I get home. And it kept saying, unavailable to connect to the network.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I have to be home for this tour? I thought I've done this before.
Yeah.
And I thought I was just dumb.
So you don't even realize how many systems depend on AWS. And so, there you just probably blamed
I blamed iRobot.
people.
Yeah, exactly. And I blamed myself for not understanding it, but now I'm happy to know it wasn't just me. And thanks, Amazon, for making sure I didn't come home to a clean house. All right, our next article is from zdnet.com. Windows 10. Microsoft reveals Pluton security chip. Expect Patch Tuesday type updates. And so, Don, I'm confused about this one because we're talking about a chip, but we're talking about Patch Tuesday, like updates. And I know those don't involve me going and getting something and sticking it in my computer, but I think that's what a chip is. So where am I confused here?
Yep. So, we have a whole generation now of field programmable chips. Wes, it's FPGA?
FPGA, yep.
And it's
Field Programmable Array.
Gateway array?
A gateway array,
There we go.
that's it, yeah.
All right.
Yep.
So Wes is my acronym guy. So these are chips that basically you can program them for special use purposes, and you can change them on the fly. You can reprogram, and that's a really useful thing in certain scenarios. They use the hell out of them in AI and other places like that. Well, one area where we're seeing a real problem right now is in the management technologies built into CPUs, right? So with Spectre and Lockdown and these attacks that are happening inside of CPUs, and even some attacks that have been focused on the management engine that's found inside of every Intel processor these days. And what can you do about it? Nothing, right? Can't update it. It's in the CPU. And Intel, they do a good job making CPUs, but they're not a security company. Their foray into security was acquiring McAfee. So you see when that gets them. And so there's this management engine that you really have no visibility into, no control over, and you can't update it. And Microsoft said that's not the way that things should be. And so they actually created a chip. They used it first in their Xbox 360. So this has been around for years now, where it's a security chip that sits outside of the processor. And they're able to maintain integrity of all the software running in the CPU's memory, in user land, in kernel space, everywhere. And malicious code is blocked and prevented from running, any unsigned applications and so on. And because it's a programmable chip, they can update it if they find something that's wrong, and they're actively maintaining it and doing that. And it's been deployed for years in these Xbox consoles. So now they're bringing it to other platforms. And they've reached an agreement with Intel to actually start building this Pluton chip into Intel CPUs. Kind of, I don't know if it's actually going to replace the management engine. Makes sense if it would, or if it's going to supplement it. Either way would work. But we're going to start seeing it there, and they're already in talks with ARM and AMD to be able to get it in places there. So hopefully this will bring about a new way where we don't have to sacrifice performance for security like we're doing right now to protect from Spectre and Meltdown.
I know we have other technologies that have been in place for a long time, Don, and I'd wonder where those technologies are going to lie. I think of things like the no execute bit, protected areas of memory that we have now. We've got address space randomization. We've got the TPM. We've got TPMs, and we've had them for a while now. It almost seems like now the CPU's got its own TPM that can practice, or it can protect what's going, maybe not necessarily the configuration state of the trusted operating system, but actually what's going on inside of the CPU at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got a company like Microsoft that's focused on maintaining the security and integrity of that chip. Apple does the same thing. Apple has their security chip, which I'm forgetting the name of. Is it the T1, T2? I think it's the T2 security chip now. So Apple's kind of done this, but they haven't made it open for anybody else to use. They just used it on their hardware. Microsoft's going a little different and opening it up for everybody to use. But we'll have to see how the adoption rates go on it. But I expect to see more of it over the next few years.
So this is not something that's in any computers yet, but besides like Xboxes, like you said, but coming soon.
I believe they announced that it was in at least one computer. Shoot, I'd have to dig and see. It is definitely something we'll see more of in the future.
It's not a wide release yet.
No.
Anything. Okay. Very cool. We'll keep an eye out for that. And speaking of chips, let's move on to our next article from Ars Technica. Linus Torvalds doubts Linux will get ported to Apple M1 hardware. Quote, I absolutely love to have an M1 laptop if it just ran Linux, Torvalds said. So, Don, why is this? What's stopping it from coming over to the new chip?
All right, so Apple switched to the ARM instruction set for their devices. Now, I think we talked about this in the previous week, that they didn't switch to ARM processors. They switched to ARM-compatible processors. They're their own in-house built proprietary CPUs, these M1 CPUs, but they use the ARM instruction set to communicate. Now, Linux runs on numerous ARM architectures that are out there. And so if Linux will already run on ARM, obviously it would run on the new M1 MacBooks, right? Mm-hmm. Well, it won't. And there's a few reasons for that. And a lot of people are looking at it saying, well, it's just a matter of time before they port it over. Linus Torvalds came out and said he's not going to put any effort into it. And some people think it's just that he doesn't want to do that, or that it's some kind of anti-Apple thing. But there is actually a more complex side to the back end of this. Mm-hmm. The CPU is just one part of a computer. You have a lot of other things, like that T2 security chip I mentioned a moment ago, right? That's outside of the CPU. It's 100% Apple proprietary, and they do not release an API for you to interact with it. And so if you want to port Linux over to a MacBook, you don't just have to support the CPU. You have to support all this other hardware that's in there, and it's next to impossible. And so while it is possible to port Linux over, it's very, very difficult and very unlikely that you'll get a good computing experience out of it. So if you're going to spend $2,000-$3,000 on a MacBook and then run an operating system on there where only half your hardware works, that's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. And so that's what Linus is saying, is that the way that it is right now, it just doesn't make sense to run Linux on the new MacBooks.
Don and I was actually in that camp. I thought it was just Linus saying, no, I don't really feel like coding that to the CPU, but then you made me aware there's a lot more holistic pieces that are running in the background that you have to get coded to make anything work on that.
Yeah, and we'll likely see more laptops and desktops come out with ARM processors. We're already seeing a few. There's crappy ones like the Pinebook, but then there'll be good ones eventually. And when that happens, we'll see Linux running on those. You've got Raspberry Pis with ARM processors, and you run Linux on those. So, it will happen. It's just not likely going to be the M1. It would be just as likely as running Linux on an iPhone. And people don't do that because, again, most of the hardware just won't work, so there's no point in doing it.
Is it Linus, not Linus?
It is Linux, yes.
No, his name?
Oh, his name is
It depends on where
Linus.
he is in the world. It's Linus, Linus.
Oh, does he?
Yeah,
Flips around.
I've seen an interview, and he says, depends on where I am.
All right, so...
Well, there you go.
Don't blow me up in the comments.
Apparently, if you don't call him late for dinner, you're fine.
Okay, perfect. All right, our next article is over at thehackernews.com. Two-factor authentication bypass flaw reported in cPanel and WHM software. I was told that two-factor, multi-factor is impenetrable
all
and
problems.
It solves everything.
could never fail. So what happened here? How did this one fail?
All right, so cPanel, if you're not familiar with it, is used by a lot of hosting providers. So, for example, if you buy service like a hosted virtual server with Media Temple or Rackspace or some provider like that, they will likely give access to cPanel or Plesk or one of those platforms. But cPanel is one of the bigger ones, which allows you to administer your server. If you want to reboot your server, you can do that through cPanel. If you want to install some software on your server or update your server, you can do it through cPanel. Works with Windows and Linux and so on. So this is administrative level access to a server, obviously something you want to protect. You don't want somebody getting into cPanel. cPanel has your backups. It can export data so you can exfiltrate information. Definitely something you want to protect. And so it, of course, supports multi-factor authentication. However, in their implementation, they require a username and a password. And then after you punch in the password, it then prompts for a code. And on the field for the code, they did not set a rate limit or a maximum retry count, which means...
brute force attack.
There you go,
Yeah,
Wes, nailed
absolutely.
it. And so basically attackers were able to focus on that. If they had an administrator's credentials, username and password, they could then brute force the multi-factor code and just throw it out. It's usually 6 digits or 8 digits. So how long does it take to run through 6 or 8 digits? An hour, 2 hours, and then they were in. So that's a big deal. They're patching it and pushing it out. But the nature of the tool, cPanel is such a powerful administrative tool. It's super dangerous.
Does this mean our 2-factor codes are now going to have like ampersands and
No, the code strength isn't the problem.
Okay.
It's they should have said, hey, 3 failures
set a
and you're
limit.
locked out.
That's right.
And a rate limit, like you can only send 1 every second or something. So
thank God. I'm like, is that an I or a 1 or a
You figure if
lowercase L?
they're saying 70 million domains, that is a lot of traction.
yeah, cPanel is huge.
Yeah.
Well, it was cPanel and WHM software. Is that the same kind of?
No, Web Host Manager.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the same type of software. It's just a different
Just a
package.
different one,
Yeah,
okay.
cPanel is designed for ISPs and service providers to run. WHM, I believe, is the one that's designed for like private companies to run. So just very similar products.
Gotcha. All right. Well, glad that is resolved and don't have to worry about that anymore. Wait, no, we do. We still have to worry about it. I mean, they fixed it.
If you're in an environment that uses cPanel, you need to make sure you update.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
There you go.
I don't. I'm good. Our next article is from ZDNet.com. A hacker is selling access to the email accounts of hundreds of C-level executives. Access is sold for $100 to $1,500 per account, depending on the company size and exec role. So this is finally a bit of good news for poor people. I think that they're not caught up in this.
They're not affected.
But this is cool. You could potentially go and buy your boss's information specifically if they're selling it $100 a head. Hey, that could be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the reasons why I grabbed this article is a lot of people wonder how much do hackers actually make off of the data that they steal. And this is one of those chances where we get a little bit of visibility into it. So hackers pull off spear phishing attacks where they're able to get the credentials for executives. And then once they've got those credentials, they turn around and sell them on the dark web. And they're getting between $100 and $1,500 depending on the size of the company, which means for a massive company, let's just assume the biggest, they're getting $1,500 per account. Now, what Peter mentioned is I can go and buy my boss's credentials. That's true, but they don't just sell these things once and that's it. They just sell them over and over and over again. And likely they're invalidated very, very quickly. So they're really making $1,500 for selling invalidated credentials after the first one. But they do resell them over and over and over.
At those kind of prices, I figured it was like a one-off thing because I know you can buy credentials for pennies or, on the dark web, I would think that are the ones that are reused over and over. Are these just higher because of the title associated with it?
Yeah, if I want to do a business email compromise, if I want to reroute payment from the accounts payable department, I don't need a network admin's account. I need the CEO's account.
Yeah.
And I can say, hey, I'm authorizing this wire transfer to this account. Well, the CEO said it. It's here in writing. That's the thing. And then you just have to remember that these people are criminals. And so they have no qualms with reselling over and over and over again. Even once the credentials, if they know they're bad, they'll still sell them because they can make money.
So kind of going back to the hack that happened on Twitter, it ultimately was just Bitcoin, but that hacker could have taken all those credentials, put them on the dark web, and started making money.
Yeah, basically. And so let's say one of those OG accounts, right? So I forget some of the shorter ones they were using. But let's say it's the letter A, so at A.
Yep.
They might sell that to you, and then Peter comes along and says, hey, I want to buy at A. And so then they just override you and sell it to him. Like,
there you go.
There's not a whole lot of honor and there's no warranty. These are criminals.
No honor amongst thieves.
That's sad. If I want to buy, at Joe Biden or whatever, I should get that exclusively if I'm willing to pay a premium.
There you go.
That's right.
Maybe that'll be in the Consumer Bill of Rights soon.
Yeah, I'm sure California has already made a law about that to make that illegal. So, all right. Well, very cool. Hey, we've got a lot of fun stuff going on right now. The most fun to me right now is our 12 Days of IT, which is where we're unboxing 12 different items over 12 days, and then we are giving them away on the 12th day. And so if you head over to itpro.tv/12 days, you can sign up to win any or all, probably just any, because I don't think you're going to get more than one of those items. And so far we've seen, a TP-Link wireless travel router, the YubiKey 5C NFC, a cable tester for USB and RJ45 cables, and you did, Wes, the HDMI KVM switch that just went up today. So a lot of cool stuff available, and a lot more to come. Let's see what that's for. So we got 8 more items still set to come out. Plenty of time to still get in there and enter to win. And then we're going to do a YouTube live on December 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, where you can check all that out as well and see if you've won. So head over to itpro.tv/12 days. Also got a cool webinar coming up very soon on Thursday, December 10th, so next week. How to make vSphere 7.0 work for you. Upgrade to the latest version, or the latest release from VMware. Adam Gordon is going to be doing that, so sign up for that at itpro.tv/webinars, and you can also head over there and see all of the archived webinars that are available for you to watch on demand as well at itpro.tv/webinars. And finally, head over to go.itpro.tv/Technado, where you can get a coupon code for 30% off your personal subscription for the lifetime of your account. And, as long as you keep it active, you're getting that great rate locked in. You can also request a team trial and information for teams to see all the cool features available when you have a team of 2 to 1,000 people. That's all available at go.itpro.tv/Technado. I have a feeling if you had 1,001 people, we'd still give you those features as well. I think.
Probably.
Yeah. We could talk about it. Well, thank you so much, Wes, for filling in
Yeah,
today.
absolutely. Thanks for having me here. This was fun.
I feel like Daniel has to earn his spot back now.
Yeah, we really have now recognized how dispensable he is.
It just feels like a more mature episode, doesn't it?
Oh, well, don't go that far.
I mean, it's a little low bar. We're talking about Daniel here, but you know that. So thank you, and thank you so much as well to Jeff Mitchell for joining us, and check out all those links in the description so you can see all the cool features that he was talking about. But thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next week right here on Technado with Don Pizzette.